to our colleagues Tiffany, Angela, and Mike for their help tonight. So, we are thrilled to be here with you in person and online for this evening's Upstart, featuring Edwin Green Fellow Yscaira Jimenez, founder of LaborX, in conversation with Jeff Livingston, founder of EdSolutions. So we're in for a real treat, in addition to the delicious food. So I will introduce them more formally in a moment, but before we launch into tonight's chat, I want to say a little bit about this Upstart and about it. So Echoing Green provides resources, including funding and leadership development support to innovative global leaders like Yscaira as they work to drive social progress further and faster. So we present Upstarts on a monthly-ish basis to discuss solutions and context, exploring why the work is so important today and for the future. And tonight's event actually kicks off a special series of Upstarts presented as part of the Partnership for Innovating for the Future of Work in New York City, powered by Barclays. So Echoing Green and Barclays are collaborating to bring social innovators and their ideas to conversations and solutions concerning the future of work and workforce development in New York. And so we're looking forward to tonight's dialogue, which touches on the state of the workforce, redefining job readiness and hiring, and understanding the intersecting work that will help dictate the potential of business and talent in New York and well beyond. So Yscaira became in 2014, and in that time launched LaborX, the LinkedIn to the Linked app. And it is a marketplace that connects hiring managers to underrepresented talent that has traditionally been ignored. And you'll have a much more robust examination of their critical work shortly. And she is joined tonight by Jeff, founder of EdSolutions, which focuses education innovation and philanthropy on underserved students, increasing the diversity of education leadership and scaling proven innovation to reach the students who will benefit most from them. So prior to forming EdSolutions, Jeff spent more than a decade as a senior executive at McGraw-Hill Education, where he was most recently the SVP of Education Policy and Strategic Alliances. So we've got a really exciting pairing for this discussion, and thank you so much to them both for being here tonight. So for those of you who have joined Upstart and Echoing Green events before, you know we're interested in your thoughts too. So bring on your questions. There will be time for Q&A before we wrap up. And with that, let's jump in and hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Hi.
Hello, Yscaira. How
How
are
are
you?
you? I'm well.
So as we get started, I wanted to make something very clear. I don't believe in objectivity. I believe in full disclosure. I don't want anybody to be confused that I am a journalist or in any way objective. Instead, I am someone who adores Yscaira Jimenez and counts among his greatest blessings the fact that she takes my phone calls. So this is not a conversation where I pretend that I don't know you. Instead, I think this is a conversation between friends about a topic I know we both care about. And I think that's a much more interesting conversation anyway.
Agreed.
Okay? So why don't we get started on behalf of the people who don't know LaborX. Why don't you tell us about what LaborX is and how LaborX happened?
Sure. So LaborX is partially named LaborX because it's a labor of love to my brother and to my community. And I started it for two reasons. So on a personal note, my oldest brother is the oldest of an immigrant family of 5 children. I'm the youngest of that family. And when he came to the States, he came as an honor student, 3 months shy of graduating. We all settled in the Bronx. And when he was enrolled in our local high school, Walton High School, he was left back to the 9th grade. So he went from an honor student, we all knew that he would probably, spend another year learning English and then maybe taking all tests. But that didn't happen for him. And after 2 years, he didn't graduate. So he dropped out and joined the workforce. And I was coming of age watching my brother really struggle to find meaningful living wage work where he can take care of himself and his family. And I had a very different outcome than my brother. I came when I was 4, and so most of my formal education happened in the Bronx, in public schools. And I was one of the lucky few who managed to go to Columbia and later on in life to MIT. And I always felt like I could do the things, or almost all of the things that I wanted to do, that I had options. And so I toyed with banking for a bit, and then found myself...
Everybody does.
New York City at least. And then found myself being pulled into education because I wanted a different outcome for people like my brother. So I ended up working in high impact tutoring in the No Child Left Behind College for All days, thinking that helping people like my brother get on a traditional pathway was the answer. And after spending a few years doing very meaningful and impactful work, serving Title I children in failing schools, I realized that a lot of them were going to graduate high school and were going to go on to college, but weren't going to graduate. They were going to drop out because they had to work. Or a lot of people weren't going to go to college because they had to work. So I started having this epiphany that maybe college at 18 or 19 is not the pathway for everyone. At the same time as a manager and director at this education company, I was overseeing a staff of 300 people. And we hired a lot of educators, we trained them to be tutors, but there was a core group of employees that I was trying to find, people who were going to make sure that students showed up after school, that their parents registered for our programs, that I couldn't find on LinkedIn, on Monster, through my Ivy League networks. And these were folks who sometimes didn't even speak English. They were very committed and involved parents at the school level. And I was like, where's the job board to find these people? Like, I had to, get really creative and do guerrilla outreach to find these folks who made sure that 300 kids showed up on a Saturday morning to get tutored and were really excited about it. And so from a personal level, I saw a failing for people like my brother to find his way into the workforce. And from a professional level, I couldn't find just people who can get the job done, independent of whether they went to school or not. And so those are the two reasons that got me to forming LaborX. And so I went back to grad school to buy myself some time to, fail in a safer place and start thinking about how I was going to solve this problem. And then I was very lucky to graduate with the support of Echo and Green and start LaborX. So that's our journey. And so what it is today, we're a talent marketplace. We aggregate talent from alternative education programs. So think of your vocational programs, your boot camps, apprenticeship programs, anything that's not a 4-year degree. We're even working with community colleges. And we've launched in the city of San Francisco in partnership with the city's Office of Economic and Workforce Development. And so what we're doing is finding great talent from these programs and promoting them to companies, not as an alternative to other hiring solutions, but really as a future of work, because 2/3 of our workforce doesn't have a 4-year degree, and we over-rely on flawed proxies like degrees and networks to fill the jobs that don't require a degree. And so I'm motivated to help people who have the highest barriers to entry, but I see this as the future of talent and of work, because education is being disrupted, and I don't know that everyone's gonna go to college for 4 years anymore.
Thank you. That's great. It turns out that there was never a time when everybody went to college for 4 years, right? We pretend that that's the case.
Right.
And even in my own work, I find myself arguing with journalists a lot who use college attendance and college graduation as synonyms. They're not. They never have been. Most people in college right now won't ever have a degree. So it's really, but the kind of people who work for sophisticated publications and all of their friends do. And so it's that kind of a network. You know, I said that I wasn't going to pretend that I don't know you, and when you said I decided to go to grad school, I know I decided to go to grad school meant I went to go and graduate from MIT with honors, my MBA. And it occurs to me that you and I are both here today because though we started in outgroups, we got a stamp of approval from places like Columbia and MIT for you and Harvard for me. And that stamp allows us to be taken seriously in ways that they would not. We might not be taken seriously if we didn't have those stamps, which means that you could be as talented as you are, as amazing as you are, but without certain kinds of permissions, you wouldn't be able to have the impact that you're having on the world. And that seems to me to be an analogy for what you're doing at LaborX too. Just acknowledging that things that should not matter in a perfect world matter an awful lot in terms of the gatekeeping function. Because, you know, Columbia and Harvard recruit and admit people who are smart, hardworking, talented, and 4 years later, and privileged, and 4 years later, give them a degree that says that they're still smart and hardworking and, and talented, and now maybe more privileged.
Yeah.
What do you think about that gatekeeping function in society? Why does it persist so much, do you think? And what should we do about how many people are left out of the possibility of contributing because they didn't get that stamp like you and I did?
Yeah, I think it's a tragedy that this gatekeeping happens. And I think, like you said, it's synonymous in hiring. So when we because we've launched in the Bay Area, we launched with a tech knowledge economy focus. And so the formula that a lot of companies use there to recruit talent is the top 10% from the top 10 schools already working at the top 10 companies. So this is how a lot of recruiters go about finding someone to fill a role. And that, 3 top percent thing, then, forget about it, unless someone referred you, because almost 90% of jobs are sourced through friends and families. So it's tragic, and I think it happens.
Say that again. 90%?
Almost 90%. So according to a LinkedIn study, I believe it's 88% of jobs are sourced through friends and family.
Okay.
And so it's like you need these degrees, and then you need the friends and family. But so I think it's tragic because, one, I think, when we talk to hiring managers and recruiters, the daunting task of hiring is we have hundreds and thousands and millions of resumes to look through. Mm-hmm. How do we whittle this down to a manageable, 20, where we can actually spend a couple of minutes looking at these 20 and then maybe inviting a few in? And so they use these imperfect proxies. They're like, well, let's put in a college degree, let's build these algorithms to sift out these top schools. And if you're getting a recommendation from someone internally, then we're going to fast track you. And so I think it's tragic because A, it's lazy, and because research and, experience and anecdotes show that, the people who we hire who do the best in the roles that we hire them for are not performing on an education or elite university level per se. It's other traits and competencies that set them apart. And when you're hired to do a job, 9 out of 10 times you haven't been taught what you need for that job in college or in the degree. You want people who are dependable, who are critical thinkers, who are problem solvers, who are empathetic, have high emotional IQ. That list goes on. And none of those, you're not guaranteed to have most of those things when you graduate with a degree. So
So I've only been in the workforce for 30 years or so. I've never met anybody who learned how to do their job in college, right? Somebody said learning about work in college is like learning about sex through the mail,
Right.
right? No matter how good you are at it, it's just not the same thing, right? It's just not. So you learn how to do a job on the job. So
Right.
it's a weird gatekeeping kind of function.
Yeah, and also, the people who are setting the rules there's also a bit of self-importance where like, well, if I had to go through college and work really hard, then it's not fair to everyone else here for us to like waive this degree. And the truth is, forget about the social impact and why this might be the right thing to do. This is also like the right business thing to do.
Right.
Research, by McKinsey and a bunch of other places show that diverse teams outperform, build better products, are more profitable than teams that are homogenous. And so
let's spend a minute on that issue of diversity. You pointed out that almost 90% of jobs have to do with friends and family. To some extent, we can choose our friends.
right.
I didn't get to choose my family. But what that means, though, is that if your family is like mine and Black and South Carolinian, or like yours and Dominican, then
In the Bronx.
Then the networks that you work are not always going to be the networks that you need access to
Right.
in order to find that job, which is how we get to a place where certainly the upper echelons of corporate America, even in a city as diverse as New York,
Yeah.
are ridiculously monoculture,
Right.
right? And I agree with you that this isn't just the wrong thing for the society, it's stupid business,
Right.
right? That I realized the other day that Alexa, born and bred in the United States, speaks German, Japanese, French, but not Spanish. I don't know any world in which that makes sense, right? Except a world in which there are no Yscairas in the room
Build
saying,
Alexa.
hey, how about the 50 million of us here
Right.
in the United States? So talk to me about how you intend through LaborX to begin to change that. And what are some things that people who want their businesses to be better by being more diverse should do?
Yeah, so by design, LaborX creates a talent pool that's a lot more diverse. So we partner with training programs that are training veterans and their families, that are training recent immigrants.
Tell us about I know what you're talking about, but not everybody here does. Give me an example of the kind of training program.
Sure. So Year Up
Okay.
is probably one of the more recognizable programs. They train Opportunity Youth. Opportunity Youth are 18, well, technically 16 to 24-year-olds who are not in school and training or working.
Right. Not in school, not at work.
Or in training. And
Or training.
so they train them for 6 months in a track, whether it's cybersecurity and IT or project coordinator. And then they place them in an internship for 6 months. So they give them a year up. So instead of having a 4-year degree, the idea is that if they have some training and some work experience, that should give them a leg up in the workforce. And young people face all sorts of barriers to the workforce. So if you don't have a degree, and that's a big barrier. There's an organization called Upwardly Global, and they help high-skilled recent immigrants. So these are folks who have an average 5 to 10 years of work experience. They might have formal education in their home country. So think about the engineers and doctors who are driving Ubers instead of building and saving lives. So that's an organization, and so many more of these organizations exist.
So these organizations train the lucky people who get to be in them.
Yes.
And then LaborX allows them to connect to.
Yeah, well, what we found from these training programs, and I'm talking about, some of the marquee ones. But on average, a lot of these workforce programs have a placement rate of about 1/3%. So only about 1/3 of the people who are lucky enough to get into these programs are placed in a job
Actually getting a job.
between, in 3 to 6 months after completing it. And it's a capacity
That
issue.
is better than a lot of colleges.
It is better than a lot of colleges. I mean, I don't think I got any of my jobs as a result of either of my institutions. But we found that, 2/3 of trained, diverse, qualified people are getting shut out of jobs because they either lack the degree or they may even have the degree but lack the networks. There's no one internally, fast tracking them to an interview. And so, a couple of years ago when these companies were shamed into publishing their diversity data, and the numbers are like, 1 to 2% Black, 2 to 3% Hispanic. It's like, how are you building technology that it's being oftentimes overly consumed by, Black and brown folks in this country, yet, you don't have people from that demographic building those, or, they could help you build even better companies. You think about all the crazy things that happen at Snapchat and those filters, very racist filters, or like, it's like, if there was a Black person on that team, that would not happen.
Exactly.
And they, they lose money, they lose market share. So this is not like, oh, this is a feel good, right thing to do. No, it's like, you're not products for your constituents.
That's exactly right. I think that makes sense. One thing I also wanted to talk about with you in the presence of our friends here in person and online, tú y yo a veces hablamos en español.
Sí.
Porque mi esposa es cubana y yo hablo y tú eres dominicana. That, just our switching into Spanish, a whole lot of people went, wait, what? What's happening? In one of the biggest Spanish-speaking cities in the world,
Yeah.
right? Language as a barrier itself, I find to be very interesting, right? You mentioned immigrants to the country who are high skilled. I have a cousin of my wife who recently immigrated to this country from Cuba. She was a surgeon in Cuba, a very famous award-winning surgeon in Cuba. But because she does not speak English yet, she can't get a job in a nursing home serving elderly Spanish speakers in Miami, right? Which seems a little crazy to me. And that to me also seems like another weird barrier. Do you find that in
Yeah, definitely. So when I was in undergrad, I studied abroad in Italy and Brazil because I wanted to learn these two languages. And, I'm in Europe where the average person speaks at least 3 languages, and it's it's celebrated, it's expected. And here there's like this, this phobia when you walk into a room and you hear a different language and you can't understand, that I can get into many other reasons as to why that is, but it's also something that holds us back. As businesses, as a nation. So, yeah, we find that for a lot of our recent immigrants, or even not so recent immigrants, but people with an accent, that their accent is oftentimes a reason why they may not advance to the next level of the interview, because the interviewee is projecting and thinking, I'm looking for people like me that I can hang out with and play beer pong or go to like happy hour or do whatever it is that, happens at socializing. I've heard this from recruiters.
Absolutely.
At tech companies where like, what matters is not whether I'm going to like this person and go get a beer with them after work. What I should be asking myself as a manager is, can I ask this person for help, and will this person ask me for help if they need it? Like, these are the types of things I need to be asking for. But because they have an accent, they not a culture fit. You'll never get a company to admit to that, but I've heard it from recruiters, from like junior recruiters who are really frustrated at the people that they're trying to get through the pipeline, make it all the way to the final, but then like never get the offer.
Right. I love that culture fit. It's very interesting. You might have noticed that I'm an African American, and I have had senior executive roles in a few companies, and it's interesting. You reach a place where cultural fit, never ever defined, never ever described. It's just cultural fit, and I always just assumed it meant I'm not white enough, or that I chose the wrong family to be born into. Do you think I'm too harsh in thinking that, or is there reason to think that that's what it means? What do they mean by cultural fit, and why won't anybody define it?
I don't think you're wrong. I think, so when I think about my own journey, particularly in fundraising, right? So even though I have all these social proofs and we're in this circle that at least lets us be here, we're not getting funded at the speed and rate that our peers who of the opposite sex and of a lighter skin tone are. And I've asked myself, like, what have I learned about fundraising? Like 6 months into becoming a fellow and trying to sell people on this idea, I came up with this formula where, like, okay, here's how far I'm getting. First, they have to like me. And they'll usually take the meeting with me because they see, oh, she went to Columbia, she went to MIT, she must be smart. I'll have a conversation. She's very likable. Okay, great. Then maybe I'll have another conversation. So we go from like to relate. And from relate, if they can relate to me, then they'll trust me. And then if they trust me, then they'll actually listen to my idea and like take it seriously. And my biggest challenge has been in the relating part. I'm usually talking to older white men who can't pronounce my name, maybe distracted. I mean, my hair is not very curly right now, but it usually is out to here. Like, I'm not the prototypical person that gets in front of them and pitches. I'm not Zuckerberg in a hoodie or, the guys from Silicon Valley show. And so it's kind of that culture fit that, and I've seen it happen. When it happens, when I hit on something that has nothing to do with my work, my business. So, with one particular gentleman, it somehow came up that I studied abroad in Italy and that I spoke. And they're like, oh, where? Florence? Oh, my God, Florence. I love Florence. You speak Italian. I speak Italian. And all of a sudden, because we had this Florence connection, like I just saw this big smile. I was like, okay, so now tell me about your business. And it was just like, I needed to get over that hurdle. What a peer of mine, an Echo and Green fellow, calls racial acrobatics. Like, you need to do these things to have the other person relate to you. And so, again, this is my fundraising journey, but it's also the recruiting journey that a lot of the people that we get through. And this is why, because if you define it and put it on paper and you're honest about it, you probably get sued, which is why they don't do it. And another anecdote that I'd like to add, we were... this company, Blue Bottle Coffee, was talking about how initially if there was a typo on someone's resume, they wouldn't consider that person. But they're like, does a barista ever need to write? Or like, we need someone with great customer service skills who's gonna show up. Like, why the hell do we care whether they can spell or not? This is not relevant to the job. And so, yes, I agree with you. And I think there is an over-reliance on what formal education does for people in the workforce. So I think depending on what role you're going to play, so if you are out there writing, when I look at social media, I look at, wow, people just did not learn basic grammar or spelling, and it hurts me every time I see it. There are many functions and jobs where that's just not important. And so why do we focus on whether this person is conjugating correctly or, they speak English well or don't have an accent, when it may or may not be relevant for them to do an outstanding job.
I think that's right. And even
just wanted to caveat
deciding
that.
what an outstanding job is, right? Telling the truth transparently, right? I was having a conversation with a venture capitalist recently who's been a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley for at least 25 years that I can say, who was talking about this process of looking for, 22-year-old with a degree from Stanford, white guy in a hoodie, that's the key. And then I said to him, you haven't had an exit since I've known you, right? Did I miss it? Or did no? Well, so you've been doing this same thing, looking for this same person for 25 years, and it doesn't work, and yet you still keep looking for it. Have you noticed that you're looking for you? Right? So if we are honest about the data, if your restaurant has 800% turnover, do something different, right? If you are having difficulty finding and keeping talent, do something different, right? If we really look at the transparency, then I think we can do that. Hi.
Question coming from a big financial services firm here in New York. What is the best way to inspire, educate, raise awareness internally around these unconscious biases through hiring? I've heard people at my company talk about, 10% of every candidate we bring or every resume we're looking at has to be a diverse or minority candidate, and it doesn't feel like quotas are the right way around it. And I've also heard some people say, we'll hire an intern from a diverse background, as a charity case.
Right.
So how do you actually change it to make it and adjusting when you talk about culture, the culture of hiring?
Yeah, so 4 main things, and usually you're supposed to say 3, but the first thing is ban the degrees where, they're not, and I think that's, having really tough conversations about why we do certain things. I'm going to give another story of one of our early clients at LaborX who said, we sat down and we thought the way to diversify our talent is to be do blind recruiting. And so we're going to take out names and pictures and, other things. And when we looked at the data, we found that white and Asian men over apply to things that they're not necessarily qualified for. So if they have 50 or 60% of the skills, they're going to apply. Women and people of color who have 80% of the skills self-select, because of the language we use, rock star ninja, and I might think of myself as a ninja, but I don't know that a lot of, people.
Rock star,
right. But, it's just so the language you use in a job description and so the degree. So banning the degree is one of them. Interviewing. So
banning the degree meaning eliminate the degree
requirement in a job description. So something either relevant training and or experience. And we can have another conversation about experience, but as a baby step is one thing.
We were talking
or
about
at least
Mark
making
Zuckerberg,
it
who has no college degree.
Or Bill Gates or, Steve Jobs or all those people. Or at the very least making it optional, but not making it a requirement. The second thing is sourcing from alternative education pools. So, shameless plug here, LaborX, we're aggregating a lot of those, but, we're happy to give you a list of 30 to 50 organizations either training the type of talent that, at least at an entry level, and some even at a mid-scale level, can start at your organization. So that's how you build a diverse pipeline. And then when it's time to interview for competency, and go in with a rubric. Okay, what are the competencies we're looking for, and what is a basic, good, and great, type of example answer look like? Not what answer are we looking for, but if I'm looking for an admin assistant and I'm looking for someone who's a problem solver, what are the thresholds for a basic, good, and a great problem solver? And then the third one is to hire for value fit and not culture fit. And value is, okay, what do we value in this company? Transparency, radical transparency, or honesty, or whatever it is. And, let people manifest their culture in whatever way it comes. And that way you're setting yourself up for someone who can add to your existing culture or completely transform your culture. So instead of fitting into a culture, those, those things can help you add and transform your culture.
I think I heard in the question too, a little bit of how do you get a financial services firm, for example, to value diversity? Just culturally as a, how do you get people who make a lot of money, have been really successful, to look for employees who are not exactly like them when they believe that.
So I feel like what a lot of companies do successfully is find the Jeffs and Yscairas of the world who went to Harvard and MIT, and they offer them jobs, but they don't empower them with headcount, budgets, and just like, you know what, we trust you to go out there and build us a very diverse pipeline. And I see this over and over in a lot of companies where there's a figurehead that's the head of diversity and inclusion, but that person has no say over recruiting, no headcount, no budget. So also saying, you know what, Jeff may know a couple more people than I do that are, diverse or, can think out of the box and where to find these people. Let me make sure that Jeff has all the support from, executives and directors and whoever, wherever the buy-in level is at, and that he has headcount and budget to go do what he needs to do.
I think that makes a big difference. Yeah. In the education business, they used to joke that when the time came for diversity, you went and hired a Latino to cover Miami and an African American to cover Detroit, and then you were done. Right. That just doesn't work. Right. That's not going to be the way you do it over time.
Right.
And I think maybe supporting internal people who are trying to do it.
Yeah. And what I've seen happen over the past few years around this diversity talk is that they've doubled down on women, and what it usually translates to is white women. And they're very proud that they went from having 20 or 30% to like 40% women now. But you can't get them in a room to talk about hiring on a race or ethnicity level, because then everyone understands that, like, the genders should be equal and we should, what do we do to get more women in the door? But when you talk about race, then it feels like affirmative action and quota, and is that right? Or is it fair? Or is it, and just people don't want to have those difficult conversations around, well, if we really want to walk this walk and not just talk the talk, then, A, we need to have these really uncomfortable conversations, and B, we need to put our money where our mouth is and, fund and empower the people who can get this work done.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Hi. I'm curious about how you've seen at LaborX retention work for folks that you have helped to find jobs, and how you work with helping people find opportunity at these amazing companies, but then helping them to actually succeed there and make sure that they don't feel like they're a commodity and instead are actually part of an organization and a culture, and not just a number.
Yeah. So building pipeline, getting people interviews is kind of like one business. Once people are hired, getting them to thrive is a whole different business. And we've decided to focus on getting people to the interview because we just don't have the resources and powers to convince companies to hire and to treat their employees well. So I don't know that, we're not doing anything to help people, retain. But, it all comes down to really being open to having culture transformation and culture, people to add to your culture and transform. And so as you're building new systems to attract more diverse talent, to hire them, if you're doing this for the right reasons and doing the heavy lift and investing in systems that are more inclusive and make space for people who may or may not look or behave or think like us, then you end up having, more inclusive places where people want to stick around. But that's not the work that we're necessarily focusing on right now.
I would say too, though, that what I've started to see happening is that there are companies that make an initiative to get non-traditional in, and and then they treat them badly. Those companies become places where the rest of us go to recruit,
Yeah.
right? They do a filter screen, they get people in, we know they're going to treat them badly, so we go there and say, now that we're past the gatekeeper, how about come work someplace that's fun too, where you can grow? And over time, that competitive market pressure will force people to change. Once people realize that all of the diverse senior executives at another company started out at their company but didn't stay, eventually people start to see that. It actually takes a remarkably long time. So I recommend this as a way to find talent. But there are, go and get them if they're not happy. These are people that you need. It's a competitive world. Did I see somebody about to move?
So this was super helpful. A lot of ideas on what we can do and sort of helping us think through our own work in our own companies. I'll ask what we can do for you. What can we do as a community to support LaborX and the growth of your organization and the incredible work you're doing?
Well, if you're hiring, let me know. We're here to help. If you or your organizations are interested in investing in the future of work, we're here to help with that too. And if you have any ideas of ways that maybe we're not thinking about how to help companies innovate internally, then let's talk, because we're not going to solve this problem until companies get on board.
So this is where it's great to invite a friend to come and do this instead of a stranger. Invest in LaborX, give her the resources necessary to do what she can do, right? Realize the business opportunity that there is in connecting people who are left out to jobs that are unfilled, and give her the money. Invest in this, right? I did everything I could to make sure everybody who's hearing this heard MIT. I made her say she speaks 5 languages. Did you hear that? I went to Brazil to learn Portuguese, went to Italy, started with Spanish and English. Did you hear this? Did you hear this, right? Invest in her so that her investments in other people can be scaled. And do that as a social impact investment if you need to, but just do it because you can make a lot of money. That there is a niche here that she is filling, and so.
Actually, fall into a little bit of a trap, though, if you mention MIT, and not mention all of her excellent qualities.
No. Also invite your father-in-law to that.
Yes.
But the reality is, anybody who meets Sky immediately sees those other qualities, but still thinks like MIT are a gatekeeper, so.
I have an interesting experience. So Yscaira mentioned talked about the relevance of education to job fit, and I think the 4 things you mentioned were problem solving, critical thinking, establishing reform, and empathy. And I actually can't think of an industry where those qualities are more relevant than something that all of us deal with, which is healthcare. And I was a surgeon on the faculty at Yale and was on the admissions committee there for many years. And those students, to get into Yale, very, very competitive to get into Yale Medical School. And yet it's really striking how few of them, when how undiverse the group of students is, and how diverse the patient population is that they have to deal with, and how few of those students are actually good at those qualities. They might have done extremely well in college and very well on the admission exam. And I'm sure you've all had the experience. How many of your doctors are really empathetic, good at establishing rapport or even eye contact? and it's kind of striking. And another thread which touches on something else you mentioned, there's been a big push in schools in general, medical schools in particular, to try to make them more diverse, the student body more diverse, recruit black students. And so Yale maybe has 15% black students. But I noticed that there was really a marked difference between the African students and the African American students. really successful, African American students, equally smart, really struggling. And I became a mentor for a lot of those students, and so I started asking why. And it seemed like pretty straightforward or very repeated answer, and that was that the African students didn't deal with the structural racism that the African American students were dealing with, that was kind of holding them back in so many important ways.
Yeah, and I think that's the elephant in the room that we haven't mentioned yet, is that, you know, a lot of this breaks down to entrench racism, classism, you know, if you want to take it a level higher. But it's not a coincidence that the people who are being shut out are Black and Latinx. Because these are the same people who are being incarcerated at way higher rates. These are the same people who are being redlined and denied, you know, all sorts of. So these systems, these are not failings of the systems. I feel like these systems, you know, have been designed in a certain way to exclude and to be very elite, right? And who gets to pass. So I'm glad you brought that up. And this is my father-in-law. I did not pay him to say that. So.
Obviously agree with that. I'm from South Carolina. You know, my family's been in South Carolina forever. Probably not a week in New York goes by without somebody asking me what island I'm from. Because there is a presumption that a certain level of success must mean you're an immigrant. And the flip side of that presumption is that garden variety American Negro like me can't have that success. And we're beginning to have those conversations, and I'm glad we're having those conversations because I think they're important. And here again, because we are leaving out the opportunity to access more talent and benefit all of us, I think it's an important conversation that structures that are racist can still be racist in the context of two different people of the same hue.
Yeah.
And having that conversation and speaking to that is something that I think is really, really very important.
But money is a barrier as well.
I agree.
That's
Sure.
a big problem for everything to move forward. For example, education, the certain types of firms. Money, if you lack it, you're in trouble.
Right.
But if you had it, you through it, in trouble or even just to get into school. Like if you're a B student, not getting into Harvard, but perhaps someone that you knew in family lineage went there, and so now they can pay something to the school and get you in.
Yeah.
And that's not fair either.
I agree with you.
Empathy is like
Yeah.
you have to open the doors in more than one way, not just like speaking the language. Wouldn't it be great if we can walk into an environment where people are speaking different languages and you learn on the job?
Right.
You know, like when you go into a college, you have teachers that come from different countries and they speak with an accent and they're accepted. Why can't you do that?
Yeah.
So
And
money is a problem.
I agree. I mean, for us, it's a common denominator in most of the groups that we serve, whether they're, you know, in rural America, whether they're veterans, whether they're, you know, in urban settings. It's a class issue. People, and I think class is now not just necessarily along race lines. It's always been along race lines, but now I think automation and, you know, the future of work and all these robots are displacing factory workers and a bunch of other people who maybe, you know, a decade or two or three ago didn't feel as vulnerable. And so I think it explains many things happening in our country and in our world today. And that's how you see class playing, you know, kind of a big role across the future of work. So, agreed.
So I think we have made it to perhaps the close of this part of the conversation, but I invite everybody to join us for more refreshments. There's plenty more food to continue the discussion, but I want to say a huge thank you to you both for
Thank you.
Thank you.